Okay, so when I ask you that question, feel free to chime in and answer. Notice I didn't say what does a room or a closet feel like. What do you see? I asked, what do you see, or what does it feel like to have a life free of clutter? Anybody want to answer that?
Calm.
Heidi?
It feels calm.
Organized, relaxing.
Liberating.
Okay. These are all positive feelings, right? And they're associated with emotion. It's not just about having empty space or less stuff around you. But the fact is that when we have less stuff around us, then we are freeing ourselves of clutter, both physically and mentally. And they're both very directly connected. Agreed?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Fine. So with that in mind, what I want to do is take you guys through a very practical 4-step process, okay, of decluttering. But I would not be giving you an honest approach if I didn't address the emotion and the moments when we get stuck and unable to either even get started on the process or certainly stay motivated through the process. Because I am sure if I asked for everybody to raise their hands, which I won't do to you, that you would very quickly see that we often can't get started because we're stuck. And even when we get started, we don't persevere through the process. So we feel like we've worked hard, but somehow we don't feel the change. Okay. So, excuse me. So with that in mind, I know a lot of you have heard me talk about the Marie Kondo, the KonMari method, and a lot of you are familiar with that. And so she's very well known, and a number of years ago when she first shared her method, she shared the idea of that we should surround ourselves with things that spark joy, that make us happy. But the end goal here for all of us really is to be in a calm, happy, pleasant environment. She's not the only one out there, by the way. For those of you who like reading up on this stuff, who might have read the KonMari method, there's a few others. There's a British woman who calls herself Mrs. Hinch, who has millions and millions of followers. Are you familiar with that? called Hinchers, right? So people know about her. There's an American woman named Beth Penn who addresses an issue that I think is skipped in the KonMari method, which is also super important, where she talks about in this age of mass consumerism that we're suffocating, that we are becoming slaves to our possessions, that we acquire so much all the time. It's so easy to acquire belongings today. And that by freeing ourselves from the physical and mental clutter that comes along with all of this stuff, we can focus on what's truly important and discover more time, more space, and again, more joy. So it's all the same message. The last person, by the way, that I think is worth mentioning is, I actually have the book right here. It's called The Gentle Art of Swedish Death Cleaning. And let me just say, if you're the type of personality that likes it said straightforward and is rather unsentimental about things, she's your person. She can be funny, but she can be a little bit brutal. And she talks about the surprisingly invigorating process of clearing out our unnecessary belongings. And it can be undertaken at any age and life stage, but should be done sooner rather than later before others have to do it for us. So she's a little bit brutal, but she makes a lot of the same points. So it doesn't matter whether we're talking about from my experience or from any of these theorists. The end goal here is to go through a process that's thorough and that is complete and that leads us to this visualization of a calm, happier place. So if we all agree with that, I'm going to get started on a little bit of practical, but I'm going to have to be honest to myself and to you and come back a little bit more to those moments when we get stuck emotionally or psychologically. I'm going to keep talking, but I'm very happy for anybody.
I hope you have change.
I'm just reading. Okay, somebody wrote in the chat, but I'm going to keep going. Okay, so here we are for step one. Step one is where we get started. And we always have to make a decision. Often I ask it at the group, but this is now turning out to be a large group. So I'm going to maybe ask a fewer questions and leave questions for the end, if that's okay. That we
140.
get started by
You will take
gathering
one
all
there.
items of a given
You came
category.
in next week.
Zara,
Uh,
put everyone on mute, please.
Okay. Okay, so we gather all items of a given category into one place at one time. Now, we always have to make a decision. Are we decluttering by location? I'm going to declutter this closet,
Across.
declutter this room, right? Or are we decluttering by category?
So fine,
Whenever
never mind.
possible, for the job to be more thorough, it's definitely better to declutter by category. Why? Because when we have all like items together in one place at one time, we're better able to assess just how much we have, just how many we own, and just which ones we like better or like less. I admit to you that when I did this the first time and I actually took everything out, which takes a lot of energy, so I understand that that's a lot to ask. But when you're working, best practice for sure is when you gather like items of a category to one place at one time, and you are working with empty space that you then put things back into, there's no question that you will declutter more, that you will get rid of less. There's been a ton of research about this, and it's certainly been the case from my experience. I will tell you, when you take everything out, and let's say you take of a category, so you take out all your tops, right? I admit to you that when I took out all my tops, and I know my sister-in-law is here and she's gonna laugh, but I had 17 white blouses. Nobody needs 17 white blouses. Even a professional organizer who has been known at times to be somewhat of a minimalist, she should not have 17 white blouses. I hated most of them, by the way, and hadn't worn them. So it's remarkable how many similar things we're attracted to and how we replace those things that we love the most and don't need them.
Yeah, that's a
Okay.
better, more direct way to go.
When you take everything out and you are putting things back in, you will declutter more. It's just the way it works, okay? And you're more inclined to get rid of than when you take things out one at a time. Okay. The second step after you've gotten started because you have all of your belongings together in the same place at the same time is the step of sorting. This is the hard part. This is the part I'm going to spend the most time on because it's the part where we get stuck emotionally, psychologically, and it's the part where you need to persevere, and it's the part that's exhausting, okay? But here's where we have to have a paradigm shift. When you're working with an empty closet and you're deciding what to put back in, you're also deciding what to keep. A lot of the research on hoarders, and I'm sure I'm not talking to any hoarders. I'm just talking to people who live their life and acquire stuff and enjoy having their stuff around them. And sometimes it gets the best of us. Sorry, one second. I realize that there are people waiting to get in. Okay.
Ilana, make me co-host and I'll watch it. It's fine.
I thought I did that already.
No,
No.
I can claim host. I've claimed host.
Okay. I'm happy.
Okay, I'll be watching.
Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, so here we are, and we are creating this paradigm shift, okay? Instead of thinking about all the things we have to get rid of, we have to decide what to keep. The notion of keeping only those things that bring us joy, which comes back from all of the theorists and is certainly a big part of the Japanese method, right? We are now having this psychological and emotional paradigm shift where we're not worried about all the things that are being taken away from us. I started saying that the research on hoarders says that psychologically, the same brain, when they've done brain mapping, we know a lot more today because of neuroscience. When they do brain mapping on hoarders, they see that the same areas of the brain are firing similar reactions, to keep it simple, when a hoarder is asked to give something away as when someone experiences physical pain. So it is really can be extremely traumatic to people. But when we change that psychological and emotional approach to the idea of you are getting to keep all the things you really love and put back all the things that you really love, instead of like holding on to that old disgusting sweatshirt because it's painful for you to give it away, it really can change the whole experience. And for those people in this group that do this with children or with grandchildren, it's unbelievable the difference that it makes to a child to rebuild and put back in all their things. You empty out the drawer of their, projects, and you say, put back in the ones you really love, as opposed to which ones are you going to throw out today? If you give me one, I'll give you one. It doesn't work that way. It's very upsetting to people that way. What's so interesting also is that the word that in Japanese that is used for this notion of sparking joy, which made her so famous, Marie Kondo, is the word tokimeku. And when you look at the meaning of the word tokimeku, and that she defines as sparking joy, its literal meaning is to flutter or to palpate or to throb. It's like a physical feeling. And she also takes it quite far, and the notion that you should show appreciation to your belongings. So you can I've gotten silly on the idea of somebody grasping onto some, old pilly sweater with holes and saying, every pill on this sweater represents a wonderful moment that we've shared, dear sweater. And the hole in it, I remember getting stuck on the doorknob, and it was a wonderful doorknob and a wonderful moment we shared. So thank you for your service. She actually says, thank each item for your service, and then you will feel comfortable to give it away. When I first heard that, it actually made me laugh. I thought it was just ridiculous, and I couldn't picture myself doing it. The more I thought about it, though, believe it or not, there's something similar in there to our Jewish values. So the idea of feeling comfortable appreciating and loving things that are materialistic would seem counterintuitive to our Jewish values. And yet, when you start to think about it, we make brachot out of appreciation for belongings all the time. The bracha of Shechianu, which is Shechianu v'kiyamanu, whose source comes from the Gemara, and we're all familiar with, when we experience something that occurs infrequently, that you derive pleasure from, like a holiday, like all the different experiences in our culture that we say Shechianu on. When we acquire a possession that's new, and that we like, we say Shechianu. And that it's a very interesting thing to think about, the idea that it is in some way kiyamanu, life affirming to us, to have and appreciate our belongings. There's the bracha of hatov v'hametiv, when others derive or we share pleasure with another person, a good bottle of wine. In the Mishnah Berurah, it says that we should make a bracha on something, lev ha'adam sameach bahem. The choice of the word lev, heart, is very reminiscent of this idea of it being something physical that we experience. And it implies that these material things make a person happy, and that we should make a bracha and appreciate our belongings. And that in some ways, because of the word lev, it's life affirming. So it's not so crazy, her idea that changing this paradigm, deciding what to keep, keeping only the things that bring you joy, and appreciating your belongings are part of our culture as well. And so the sorting process is where we get stuck. And from a psychological point of view, I don't know how many of you are familiar with positive psychology. I'm a big fan, but this is not a lecture on positive psychology. Tal Ben-Shahar, if you're familiar with him, he's a lecturer at Harvard and here at IDC. And he did studies where he asked parents, what do you want from your children? And for your children. And every parent, if I were going to ask you guys, but again, we're a giant group, so I'm not going to ask, you would all answer, I am sure. I want them to be happy. I want them to be content. I want them to be successful in whatever way they determine success, or sometimes in the way we want them to be successful, if we're being honest. I want them to be content. I want them to be healthy. All of these very positive things is what we want from our children. And he then worked hard to incorporate the science of happiness into the education system. When we think about using positive psychology in everyday life, we realize that deciding what to keep is very much in sync with positive psychology. Traditional psychology was to focus on what's wrong, on what to change or get rid of in our lives. Positive psychology is a different approach, very much in sync with this change in paradigm I'm talking about to get yourselves unstuck, which is, which is what is going right, and focusing on what to keep in our lives is very much in sync with this notion that we now, and the approach that we now clearly all share after all of everything I've just said, when we go through the sorting process. So now I know you're desperate for me to get more practical again, and I'm going to. I think I'm done with all the backup, but I think it's really necessary, and it's where we get stuck. Okay, if I asked you guys, why do we keep the things we don't use? Does anybody want to take a moment to unmute and share?
Because you might need them again in the future. Anything you give away, invariably the next day you say, where is my widget?
The next day or 10 years later, but somehow, someday it comes up again. Okay, anybody else?
Sentimentality.
Definitely. I feel an emotional connection to it.
Ilana, I have to tell you that we downsized like radically. And I thought I would miss all those things because we had to do it very quickly. And I have to say it is very freeing. I was shocked by it. I didn't think about it during the process enough, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
But
that's probably good, because if you thought a lot about it, you might not have done it as good of a job.
For sure. It was like chaos, but it was...
Lahavdil. A lot of you knew me back then. Soon after we moved to Israel and we built our home, we experienced a house fire. And we lost a lot of our possessions in that house fire. And yes, it was traumatic. The traumatic part was not losing any of the possessions, though. That was what was so remarkable to me. And it shouldn't happen to anybody that way, but it's amazing. It's amazing. So the answers that come up every single time I ask that question is, we may need it someday. It was a gift. It was expensive. It represents some kind of a past memory. I have an emotional connection, nostalgia. I'll never be able to replace it is a huge one for all of us transplants, because we got it wherever we came from, and we just feel like we'll never be able to get it here in Israel. That excuse is really kind of going away, I have to say, or maybe I'm just getting used to being here. But I love the quote that there are 7 days in a week and some day isn't one of them. Because this idea that we may need it someday, while it's true, we may need it someday, more often than not, it's kind of a tale that we tell ourselves, because needing something is not the same thing as loving it. And yes, it's good to be prepared, but I ask you very sincerely, at what cost? At what cost to your everyday functionality is it worth keeping all these things around you? At what cost to your accessibility on a day-to-day, day in, day out of your stuff is it worth having all this extra stuff? And it's really important to remember that that things end and memories last forever. Things that are a gift, your connection is perhaps to that person and not to the actual item. And things that were expensive once doesn't mean we need them today. So there's a lot of reasons why these are the places where we get stuck. In order to help you get unstuck from that moment, I would like to take you through an actual order that's been proven by research and that's recommended to do your decluttering. So here we're getting back to being a little bit more practical. I see some chats. I'm just going to check if it's okay. I want to make sure I'm not ignoring anybody. Okay, so when we go through the decluttering, it surprises people, but research says that you should start with your own belongings. It's really, really, really easy to blame everybody else in the house for why the house is cluttered. No doubt. Guilty as charged. It's everybody else's stuff. If everybody else would just stay on top of their stuff, this house wouldn't be such a wreck, whatever you might think. Let me say this, and I'm going to repeat it again later as a reminder, but we can't change people. When we change, people change with us. So my best practice I can share with you is start with your own belongings. experience the joy of your own personal stuff being in order. Learn through that process and then go through the other stages of the house. I can't go through each one of these in detail. I'm going to take you into a little bit more detail about your clothing because that's where I want you to start. And then I'm going to briefly mention the other areas. But if anybody has any specific, bye Emma, if anybody has any specific things that they want to ask me about, feel comfortable to ask me at the end, WhatsApp me, email me, call me, whatever afterwards. But when we start with, and we go in this order, we build up our skill set before we get to the hard stuff. If you think starting with your papers or your knickknacks, or certainly your sentimental items, your nostalgia, you're going to be strong and powerful and capable of it, bad idea. When I teach, I work with people on their cognitive organizational skills as well. And especially when I work on project management or with students, with teens, I encourage them when it comes to that to start and work hard first, get the bad stuff done first. I don't when it comes to decluttering. You need to build your motivation and build your skill set. And remember that 80%, the 80-20 rule, that most people wear 20% of their clothing 80% of the time. And I think we would all agree that we all have our favorites. So now to break down clothing, there's even an order. And by the way, don't worry if you want a copy of any of these slides or you want this order sent to you, let me know. But there's even an order building up that skill set within your clothing, okay? There's even a master list out there, which I can share, in each of the categories, what you're supposed to do first and second. A lot of it's personal, but sometimes people need the checklist. When it comes to the checklist of clothing, imagine for yourself that you take out all of your tops, you find 17 white blouses, at the same time in one place, that's the category, and you sort through it, and you are putting it back into empty space, as we said. I'd like to say that if you've gone through all of these beginning ones, then by the time you get to your bags, accessories, and shoes, which you generally would use with more of your items, when you have less items, when you have fewer items, you keep fewer of those things. So there's a reason why this order works. We're going to quickly go through these other areas that we have to sort. The kitchen is very similar to clothing. You go through it by category, whatever your categories might be, baking, parve, meat, dairy, whatever. Take everything out, same theory. I put the word oi next to books because for most of us who are on this, our generations, that we span maybe 2 generations here, but our generation is connected to books. It was a source of how we got information, and that's not true anymore. So the younger generations simply don't have that emotional connection to books. Also within our culture, I think it's important to separate secular books from Judaica, from Sfarim, because Sfarim represent art in our home. They represent culture. They represent, it's okay with us if somebody asks us every 10 years for a particular book. We're so excited that we have that book and it's part of our culture. So books are a rough one. There's less and less occasions to donate them now. A lot of them, unfortunately, when you're done with them, go to recycle or Geniza. And so it's very emotional for our generation, but not even relevant with the next generation. It's incredible. And even like 10 years younger than I am, let's say, they have a very different connection to books. When it comes to papers, we obviously can't go into a whole story on papers here, but think 2 things. Action required. There should be some place where things that really need to be dealt with immediately in an active way should be. And then there should be the things that you need to store long term. That list also has gotten quite small. There's no reason for statements or from insurance companies and banks and all that to be kept. By the time you've gone through your clothing, the kitchen, the books, the papers, when it comes to your knickknacks and your sentimental items, you have a different skill set and you might actually have room for them. And you might also feel less connected to them. And that's what I see by going through the process with people. It's not as traumatic. But don't start there. People often think it doesn't have worth. It's not, you don't really need that. That's not where you start in this case. The third step here would be to discard or to donate. Obviously, the most important thing I can say about this is if you're donating, and we have a ton of opportunities and places in Israel to donate to really good causes. And when you feel good about the cause that you're donating to, it makes it easier. And it's part of this positive psychology approach in our lives, that we're giving something away, but we're giving something away that will be used and valued somewhere else. And I repeat the message that I said before, because it always seems like everybody has a great idea of what the other person in the family should be giving away and parting from. We can't make people change, but when we change, people change with us. Okay. The last step is how you store your things. And so these are just a few cute ideas and helpful ideas that I think people like very much. Some of you have learned about them from me before, in particular your scarf. It's always, everybody loves to fold their scarves after they've been to a workshop with me. But ideally there should be a single space, a single location for each category. So in your dreams, we can all, and some of us can go back to housing in previous lives where there were big linen closets in the hallway and a giant coat closet next to the front door, but that doesn't exist for us, right? I actually just mentioned earlier that I just came back from the States, and I actually found myself standing in a walk-in linen closet in my sister-in-law's house, and it's a very standard house. There's nothing fancy about it. And I just stood there and like looked around, and she caught me and I said, I just want to have a linen closet. So it would ideally be that every category has only one location in the house, and then life gets in the way. But if ideally that would be your goal, keeping your storage simple is hugely important. I want to start with the idea that your goal is to make everything easy to put away, not easy to take out. But if it's easy, when you want something, you'll work hard to get it. But if it's easy to put away, it's also easy to take out. And if it's easy to put away, the little people and even our lazy selves will actually put it away when it's easy. So I am not somebody who encourages fancy storage systems. I do believe that certain things are best stored in boxes or in containers of some kind, especially because the closets here in Israel have that depth that the back half can be not properly used. Very often, if you have a front bin and a back bin, or at least a pile in the back and a bin in front, it can be very helpful. Being able to take a bin down and out, use whatever you need and put it back is very helpful, keeps the shelves tidy. And especially with younger children, even if the school uniform shirts are a big mumble jumble mess in a bin, it's better than a mumble jumble mess on the shelf mixed with everything else. The vertical folding, which I have in this picture here, which is one that a lot of you guys really like, definitely saves space, definitely makes things easy to see and access, and is something that surprisingly the kids can learn to do and maintain. And every now and then you got to refold them for them, but they take things out because they can see which ones they want in a much more efficient way. Okay, so a few more ideas on this last step before I open up to questions. Just visually, when we hang things up, this we got from retail marketing ideas, and you'll see it in stores if you pay attention. Things are always should be hung up and to the right, meaning from dark to light, some people do, or lower on the left and higher on the right. When you do that and you set that precedence in the closets, especially with your kids, they naturally put things away when the shorter things, the skirts and the shirts on the most simplistic level on the right side, they find things quicker and they're more inclined to put things away with some semblance of order. It is a very simple technique that works. And another nice idea, just as not 100% connected to storage, but that really is kind of fun and works really well with kids, is when you turn all the hangers backwards in the closet. So when somebody needs to take something out that they're going to wear, they use it, put it back in the right direction. You can see after whatever period of time it is, it's often recommended a year, that the hangers that never got turned around are the things you should really focus on. Wait, all the seasons have passed, and do I really want this, need this? So it's a nice trick, and it's a game that works well with kids, especially the teenagers. So we've now gone through all 4 stages. As a quick review, the idea is to create order by category, ideally not by location, to gather all like items into one location. The second step would be to sort and keep only the things that you love. That's where we most often get stuck and it's hard to stay motivated. And that's why we talked through the psychological and emotional issues associated with that. Keep in mind that someday may never come and that the cost of keeping things may outweigh the benefit. When you go through the sorting process, leave the harder categories for later. Discard and donate to places that you love and that make you feel happy to donate to them. We ourselves here in Renana have the brainchild Haboidam of Ellie Letterman with a drop-off point in town, which is a really wonderful place among many others, but I always like to give him a shout out. If you have specific things you'd like to donate, you can reach out to me and I can make suggestions. And the last step is to store things simply so that they're easy to see and easy to get to and pleasing to the eye, and most importantly, easy to put away. And the last thing I just want to say is that, you know, happiness and joy doesn't come from having more stuff, from having more belongings. But it's from real happiness comes from good relationships and meaningful jobs and pursuing intellectual, social, and spiritual experiences, which we like this and that we can share with the community. And I'm now going to yield to questions. I hope you guys enjoyed. I'm going to stop sharing the slides.
Thank you, Ilana. I've asked everybody to unmute, so if